Question 1. The assessment process reveals that a critical financial model developed using IBM Algo Financial Modeler exhibits significant performance issues during its execution. Upon investigation, it is discovered that a core calculation, responsible for a substantial portion of the model's runtime, has been implemented as a single, highly intricate function to maximize computational efficiency. The developer responsible for this implementation believes that further optimization is difficult without making the code even more dense and less readable. What is the most professionally sound approach to address this situation, considering the need for both performance and model integrity? Option A. Embed the complex logic directly within a single, highly optimized function, and rely on extensive inline comments to explain its operation. Option B. Replace the complex function with a precompiled library that offers superior performance but lacks internal documentation or transparency. Option C. Refactor the complex calculation into a series of smaller, well-defined and documented functions, prioritizing clarity and modularity, and then reevaluate performance. Option D. Focus solely on further optimizing the existing complex function, accepting that readability will be significantly compromised. Correct answer is C. Refactor the complex calculation into a series of smaller, well-defined and documented functions, prioritizing clarity and modularity, and then reevaluate performance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, where a developer must balance the need for efficient model execution with the integrity and auditability of the model's logic. The pressure to deliver a performance solution can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise transparency. The professional challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with obfuscated logic, ensuring that the model remains understandable, maintainable, and compliant with regulatory expectations for transparency and auditability, even when performance is a key driver. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes clarity and maintainability by refactoring the complex logic into well-defined, reusable components. This aligns with best practices in software development and financial modeling, emphasizing modularity and readability. From a regulatory perspective, particularly within frameworks that mandate clear audit trails and model validation, such as those overseen by the FCA in the UK, which would be relevant for a developer working with IBM Algo Financial Modeler in a regulated environment. This approach ensures that the model's underlying assumptions and calculations are easily understood and verifiable by auditors, risk managers, and regulators. This transparency is crucial for demonstrating compliance and for effective risk management. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves embedding the complex logic directly within a single, highly optimized function. While this might yield marginal performance gains, it severely hinders readability and maintainability. From a regulatory standpoint, this obfuscation makes it difficult for internal audit, external auditors, or regulators to understand the model's behavior, increasing the risk of undetected errors or misinterpretations. This lack of transparency can be seen as a failure to adhere to principles of good governance and auditability, potentially violating requirements for clear documentation and understandable model logic. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on comments to explain the complex embedded logic. While comments are valuable, they are not a substitute for well-structured code. If the code itself is convoluted, comments can become outdated, incomplete, or misleading, offering a false sense of understanding. This approach fails to address the root cause of the complexity and can lead to significant issues during model validation, or when the model needs to be updated or debugged by a different developer. It represents a failure to implement robust, self-documenting code, which is a hallmark of professional development and a requirement for effective regulatory oversight. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes clarity, maintainability, and auditability alongside performance. When faced with complex logic, the initial step should be to analyze the potential for refactoring into more manageable, understandable units. Performance considerations should be addressed after the logic is clear and correct, using profiling tools to identify actual bottlenecks rather than premature optimization that sacrifices readability. This iterative approach, focusing on building a sound and transparent foundation, is essential for meeting both business objectives and regulatory obligations. Question 2. When evaluating the ethical implications of using proprietary client data for developing a financial model and considering the potential for demonstrating advanced modeling techniques, which course of action best upholds professional integrity and regulatory compliance? Option A. Share anonymized segments of the proprietary client data with colleagues in a different department to solicit feedback on the modeling approach, with the understanding that they will also maintain confidentiality. Option B. Utilize the proprietary client data exclusively for the development of the agreed-upon financial model, ensuring all data handling adheres strictly to the non-disclosure agreement and contractual terms, and refrain from any external demonstration or use of this specific data. Option C. Use the proprietary client data to create a public-facing case study illustrating the effectiveness of the financial modeling techniques while redacting all identifying client information. Option D. Incorporate anonymized or generalized elements of the proprietary client data into a separate, non-client-specific demonstration model to showcase advanced modeling capabilities to potential new clients. The correct answer is B. Utilize the proprietary client data exclusively for the development of the agreed-upon financial model, ensuring all data handling adheres strictly to the non-disclosure agreement and contractual terms, and refrain from any external demonstration or use of this specific data. Explanation. The scenario presents an ethical dilemma concerning data integrity and client confidentiality within the context of financial modeling. The challenge lies in balancing the developer's responsibility to deliver accurate and reliable models with the imperative to protect sensitive client information and adhere to professional ethical standards. The developer is privy to proprietary data that, if misused or improperly handled, could lead to significant reputational damage for both the client and the developer's firm, as well as potential regulatory breaches. The correct approach involves a commitment to data security and ethical data handling. This means strictly adhering to the terms of the non-disclosure agreement, NDA, and any other contractual obligations regarding client data. It requires the developer to use the data solely for the intended purpose of building the financial model and to avoid any unauthorized disclosure or use. This aligns with fundamental ethical principles of confidentiality and professional integrity, which are implicitly or explicitly reinforced by professional bodies and regulatory expectations for financial professionals. The developer's duty is to the client's data security and the integrity of the modeling process. An incorrect approach would be to leverage the client's proprietary data for personal gain or to share it with unauthorized third parties, even if it's for a seemingly benign purpose like demonstrating capabilities. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and potentially a violation of data protection regulations. Such actions erode trust, damage professional reputation, and can lead to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to use the data in a way that could inadvertently reveal sensitive information, even if not intentionally shared. This highlights a lack of due diligence in data handling and a failure to uphold the highest standards of professional conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding and strictly adhering to all contractual obligations, including NDAs. 2. Identifying potential ethical conflicts and assessing their implications. 3. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity or concern. 4. Prioritizing client confidentiality and data security above all else. 5. Ensuring that all actions are transparent and justifiable from an ethical and regulatory standpoint. Question 3. System analysis indicates that a financial institution is developing a complex interest rate risk model using IBM Algo financial modeler. The development team is under pressure to deliver the model quickly to meet a regulatory reporting deadline. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with UK regulatory frameworks, such as the FCA Handbook and SISI guidelines, regarding model integrity and auditability? Option A. Focus primarily on achieving the desired model performance metrics and speed, assuming that regulatory bodies will only scrutinize the final report and not the underlying model development process or data lineage. Option B. Develop the model without explicit data validation checks, assuming that any data anomalies will be identified and corrected during the final output testing phase, and document only the major architectural decisions. Option C. Rely on the external data provider to guarantee the accuracy and regulatory compliance of all input data, and conduct a final manual review of the model's output by the compliance department just before the reporting deadline. Option D. Implement automated data validation rules within the model to check input data against predefined criteria and maintain detailed logs of all model modifications, data sources, and parameter changes throughout the development process. The correct answer is D. Implement automated data validation rules within the model to check input data against predefined criteria and maintain detailed logs of all model modifications, data sources, and parameter changes throughout the development process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the implementation of regulatory compliance within a financial modeling environment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient model development with the stringent requirements of regulatory adherence, specifically concerning data integrity and auditability. Developers must ensure that the models they build not only perform accurately, but also provide a clear, traceable record of their construction and the data they utilize, which is crucial for regulatory scrutiny. The pressure to deliver functional models quickly can sometimes conflict with the meticulous documentation and validation processes mandated by regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the integration of regulatory compliance checks directly into the IBM Algo financial modeler development lifecycle. This involves establishing clear data validation rules within the model itself, ensuring that input data conforms to regulatory standards before it is processed. Furthermore, it mandates comprehensive logging of all model changes, data sources, and parameter settings. This approach represents best professional practice because it proactively addresses regulatory requirements, embedding compliance rather than treating it as an afterthought. The UK Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) Handbook, particularly sections related to principles for businesses (PRIN) and specific conduct of business rules, mandates that firms must act honestly, fairly, and professionally in accordance with the best interests of their clients. For financial models, this translates to ensuring accuracy, reliability, and transparency, which are directly supported by robust data validation and audit trails. The CISI Code of Conduct also stresses integrity, diligence, and competence, all of which are demonstrated by a compliant development process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on post-development manual checks by a separate compliance team. This is professionally unacceptable because it introduces significant risk. Manual checks are prone to human error, can be time-consuming, and may not identify issues until late in the development cycle, leading to costly rework. It fails to meet the FCA's expectation of embedding robust controls throughout the process and could be seen as a reactive rather than proactive compliance measure, potentially violating PRIN 3 customers, treating customers fairly. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize model performance and functionality over detailed data lineage and auditability, assuming that regulatory bodies will only focus on the final output. This is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. Regulators, including those overseen by the FCA and guided by CISI principles, require transparency and traceability. The absence of clear data lineage and audit trails makes it impossible to verify the integrity of the model's results, potentially leading to breaches of rules requiring firms to have adequate systems and controls, SISC, and to be able to demonstrate compliance. This approach also undermines the principle of acting with due skill, care, and diligence. A third incorrect approach is to use generic, unverified data sources without implementing any internal validation mechanisms, assuming the data providers are compliant. This is professionally unsound and carries significant regulatory risk. Firms are ultimately responsible for the data used in their financial models. Relying on external assurances without independent verification can lead to the use of inaccurate or inappropriate data, which can result in flawed models and breaches of regulatory obligations, including those related to risk management and accurate reporting. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to regulatory compliance in financial modeling. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to their firm and the models being developed. The decision-making process should prioritize embedding compliance controls early and continuously throughout the development lifecycle. This includes thorough data validation, robust documentation of model logic and assumptions, comprehensive testing, and maintaining detailed audit trails. When faced with potential conflicts between development speed and compliance rigor, professionals should escalate concerns to management and compliance departments, advocating for the necessary resources and time to ensure adherence to regulatory standards. The guiding principle should always be to build models that are not only functional and accurate, but also transparent, auditable, and demonstrably compliant with all relevant regulations. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for unauthorized access to sensitive client financial data during the development and testing phases of a new risk model with an IBM Algo financial modeler. Which of the following is the most appropriate approach to ensure regulatory compliance regarding data privacy and integrity? Option A. Rely solely on the IT department's general data security measures to protect client data, without specific implementation within the modeling tool. Option B. Utilize a demo or test dataset that mimics real client data for all development and testing, assuming this adequately addresses compliance concerns. Option C. Proceed with model development using raw, identifiable client data and plan to anonymize it only in the final reporting stage. Option D. Implement robust data anonymization techniques within IBM Algo Financial Modeler to mask sensitive client information before it is used for model development and testing. The correct answer is D. Implement robust data anonymization techniques within IBM Algo Financial Modeler to mask sensitive client information before it is used for model development and testing. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, ensuring that the model's outputs are not only technically accurate, but also compliant with regulatory requirements, specifically concerning data privacy and integrity. The challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive data analysis with the imperative to protect sensitive client information, a core tenet of financial regulation. Developers must navigate the complexities of data anonymization and secure handling, understanding that a failure to do so can lead to significant legal, financial, and reputational damage. The pressure to deliver functional models quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise these critical compliance aspects. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing robust data anonymization techniques within the IBM Algo Financial Modeler environment before any sensitive client data is used for model development or testing. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and privacy by design, which are fundamental to regulatory frameworks governing financial institutions. By anonymizing data, the developer ensures that no personally identifiable information, PI, is exposed during the modeling process, thereby mitigating the risk of data breaches and noncompliance with data protection regulations. This proactive measure demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and ethical data handling, safeguarding both the institution and its clients. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with model development using raw, identifiable client data, with the intention of anonymizing it only in the final reporting stage. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It exposes sensitive data to unnecessary risk throughout the development lifecycle, increasing the likelihood of accidental disclosure or unauthorized access. This approach violates the principle of data minimization and fails to implement adequate safeguards from the outset, potentially contravening regulations that mandate the protection of client data at all stages. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the IT department's general data security measures without specific implementation within the modeling tool. While general IT security is important, it is insufficient for addressing the specific risks associated with financial modeling, such as the aggregation and analysis of sensitive financial data. Financial regulations often require specific controls within the application layer to ensure data privacy and integrity. Delegating this responsibility entirely to IT without direct implementation in Algo Financial Modeler creates a compliance gap and demonstrates a lack of understanding of the developer's direct responsibilities in maintaining regulatory compliance. A further incorrect approach is to assume that using a demo or test dataset that mimics real client data is sufficient for compliance. While demo data can be useful for initial testing, it does not fully replicate the complexities and sensitivities of actual client data. If the model is intended to be deployed with real client data, then the development and testing phases must incorporate the same rigorous data protection measures that will be applied in production. Failing to do so means the model's compliance with data privacy regulations has not been adequately validated, leading to potential future noncompliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to regulatory compliance in financial modeling. This involves proactively identifying potential compliance risks, such as data privacy and integrity, and embedding controls within the development process. When developing models in IBM Algo Financial Modeler, developers must prioritize data anonymization and secure data handling as integral parts of the workflow, not as an afterthought. This requires a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape and the capabilities of the modeling software to implement these controls effectively. A continuous review and validation process, involving both technical and compliance teams, is essential to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations. Question 5. Assessment of the developer's responsibility when a new risk reporting module in IBM Algo Financial Modeler is being developed and potential data integrity issues are identified that could impact regulatory compliance, but the project timeline is aggressive. Which of the following actions best upholds regulatory compliance and professional ethics? Option A. Proceed with the deployment of the new module as scheduled, assuming that the identified data integrity issues are minor and will be resolved in a subsequent update. Option B. Focus solely on completing the technical development of the new module within the given timeline, deferring any investigation or resolution of data integrity issues to a later, unspecified date. Option C. Document the identified data integrity issues, propose mitigation strategies, and seek approval for a revised timeline or phased deployment to address these concerns before full implementation of the new module. Option D. Implement the new module immediately and inform the compliance department of the data integrity issues after deployment, requesting them to monitor for any potential discrepancies. The correct answer is C. Document the identified data integrity issues, propose mitigation strategies, and seek approval for a revised timeline or phased deployment to address these concerns before full implementation of the new module. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, balancing the need for rapid deployment of new features with the imperative of maintaining robust regulatory compliance. The pressure to deliver a new risk reporting module quickly, coupled with the developer's awareness of potential data integrity issues, creates a conflict between business objectives and regulatory obligations. The developer must exercise sound professional judgment to navigate this tension, ensuring that the model's output is not only functional, but also compliant with the relevant regulatory framework. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks to data accuracy and model integrity before deployment, even under time constraints. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic process of identifying potential data integrity issues, documenting them thoroughly, and implementing appropriate controls or workarounds before the model is deployed. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management expected within regulated financial environments. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to the integrity and reliability of financial models, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance. By raising concerns early and proposing solutions, the developer demonstrates adherence to ethical standards and a commitment to producing compliant and trustworthy financial models. This approach prioritizes accuracy and compliance over expediency, which is essential for avoiding regulatory breaches and maintaining client trust. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with deployment without addressing the identified data integrity issues represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the accuracy and reliability of the model's output, which could lead to misreporting of financial data, incorrect risk assessments, and ultimately, breaches of regulatory requirements. This approach prioritizes speed of delivery over the fundamental duty to ensure model integrity. Ignoring the data integrity issues and assuming they will be resolved later is also a failure. This passive approach abdicates responsibility for ensuring compliance and introduces a high risk of undetected errors propagating through the system. It suggests a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold professional standards in model development. Focusing solely on the technical implementation of the new module without considering the data inputs and their potential impact on compliance is another critical failure. This narrow focus overlooks the broader implications of model development within a regulated context, where data quality is intrinsically linked to regulatory adherence. It demonstrates a misunderstanding of the developer's role in ensuring the overall integrity and compliance of the financial modeling system. Professional reasoning. Professionals in financial modeling development must adopt a risk-based approach to their work. When developing or modifying models, especially those impacting regulatory reporting, it is crucial to 1. Identify potential risks. Proactively consider all aspects of the model, including data sources, logic, and outputs, for potential issues that could impact compliance. 2. Document findings. Clearly record any identified risks, their potential impact, and proposed mitigation strategies. 3. Escalate concerns. Communicate identified risks and propose solutions to relevant stakeholders, including management and compliance officers, in a timely manner. 4. Implement controls. Ensure that appropriate controls are in place to mitigate identified risks before deployment. 5. Seek validation. Obtain independent validation or review of critical components or changes to the model. This systematic process ensures that regulatory requirements are met and that the integrity of financial models is maintained, thereby safeguarding the organization from regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Question 6. Comparative studies suggest that when developing financial models for regulated entities in the UK, a developer's approach to incorporating regulatory compliance can significantly impact the model's acceptance and the firm's standing. Considering the principles of the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations for model development and deployment? Option A. Developing the model based on industry best practices for financial modeling, without explicit reference to specific UK regulatory requirements, assuming that general sound practice will suffice. Option B. Prioritizing the integration of regulatory data validation checks and audit trails directly into the model's architecture and development lifecycle, ensuring that compliance is a foundational element rather than an afterthought. Option C. Documenting model assumptions and limitations only at a high level, with detailed regulatory compliance checks deferred to the post-deployment review phase. Option D. Focusing primarily on optimizing the model's predictive accuracy and performance metrics, with regulatory compliance checks being a secondary consideration, addressed only after the core model functionality is established. The correct answer is B. Prioritizing the integration of regulatory data validation checks and audit trails directly into the model's architecture and development lifecycle, ensuring that compliance is a foundational element rather than an afterthought. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between developing innovative financial models and adhering to stringent regulatory compliance requirements. The developer must ensure that the model's design and implementation not only meet business objectives, but also satisfy the specific mandates of the UK's regulatory framework, particularly as it pertains to financial services and data integrity. The challenge lies in translating abstract regulatory principles into concrete model design choices and validation processes. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive and integrated compliance strategy. By embedding regulatory considerations into the model development lifecycle from the outset, the developer ensures that the final product is not only functional but also demonstrably compliant. This aligns with the principles of compliance by design and the expectations set by bodies like the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) in the UK, which emphasize robust governance, risk management, and data accuracy in financial modeling. This approach minimizes the risk of costly rework, regulatory sanctions, and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on model performance without explicit consideration of regulatory data validation requirements would fail to meet the standards expected under UK financial regulations. This could lead to the use of models that, while perhaps mathematically sound, do not produce outputs that are verifiable or auditable to the satisfaction of regulators. Such a failure could be interpreted as a breach of due diligence and a disregard for the integrity of financial reporting. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of development over thoroughness in documenting model assumptions and limitations would also be professionally unacceptable. Regulatory scrutiny often involves detailed examination of the rationale behind model design and the assumptions underpinning its outputs. A lack of comprehensive documentation hinders the ability to demonstrate compliance and can raise red flags during an audit, suggesting a potential lack of control or understanding of the model's behavior. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to understanding regulatory obligations relevant to the specific financial product or service being modeled. This includes consulting relevant FCA handbooks, guidance notes, and any specific industry codes of conduct. Developers should then map these requirements to the model's architecture, data inputs, processing logic, and output validation. Regular consultation with compliance officers or legal counsel specializing in financial regulation is crucial. Furthermore, a robust testing and validation framework that explicitly includes checks against regulatory requirements, alongside functional and performance testing, is essential. Documenting all compliance-related decisions and validation steps throughout the development process provides an auditable trail. Question 7. The control framework reveals a discrepancy in the model validation process for a newly developed interest rate risk model within IBM Algo financial modeler. The model was built by a senior developer who has extensive experience with the tool and the underlying financial concepts. The development team has conducted internal testing, confirming the model produces outputs consistent with their expectations. However, there is no record of an independent review of the model's conceptual soundness, data inputs, or its suitability for regulatory reporting purposes. Which of the following actions best addresses this control gap in accordance with regulatory expectations for model risk management? Option A. Initiate an independent validation of the model, focusing on its conceptual soundness, data integrity, performance testing, and suitability for its intended regulatory reporting use, and ensure all findings and remediation are thoroughly documented. Option B. Conduct a brief review of the model's code for any obvious errors, and then proceed with deployment, as extensive independent validation is often a time-consuming and costly process. Option C. Proceed with deploying the model for regulatory reporting, and address any potential issues that may arise during future regulatory examinations or audits. Option D. Rely on the senior developer's expertise and the internal testing results, assuming that their experience is sufficient to guarantee the model's compliance and accuracy. The correct answer is A. Initiate an independent validation of the model, focusing on its conceptual soundness, data integrity, performance testing, and suitability for its intended regulatory reporting use, and ensure all findings and remediation are thoroughly documented. Explanation. The control framework reveals a potential gap in the regulatory compliance procedures for a financial institution utilizing IBM Algo financial modeler. The challenge lies in ensuring that the model development and deployment processes adhere strictly to the regulatory requirements applicable to the financial services industry, specifically within the jurisdiction relevant to the exam, which is implied to be UK/CISI, based on typical IBM Algo financial modeler contexts, and the absence of other specified jurisdictions. This scenario is professionally challenging because a failure to comply can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and regulatory sanctions. The core issue is not the technical functionality of the model itself, but the governance and oversight surrounding its creation and use. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and documented validation process that aligns with regulatory expectations for model risk management. This involves independent review, clear documentation of assumptions, limitations, and testing, and a robust change control process. This represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the principles of sound governance and risk management mandated by regulatory bodies like the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK. Such practices ensure transparency, accountability, and the reliability of financial models used for critical decision-making, thereby safeguarding both the institution and its clients. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical accuracy of the model, without considering the broader regulatory context, is professionally unacceptable. This would constitute a regulatory failure, because it neglects the requirement for comprehensive model validation, which includes assessing the model's conceptual soundness, data integrity, and performance in relation to its intended use, all within a regulated environment. Another incorrect approach that bypasses independent review and relies on the developer's self-assessment is also a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This undermines the principle of independent challenge, a cornerstone of effective model risk management, and increases the likelihood of undetected errors or biases that could lead to noncompliance. A third incorrect approach that fails to document the model's limitations and assumptions would be a failure to meet transparency requirements, making it impossible for auditors or regulators to assess the model's appropriateness and potential risks. The professional reasoning process for navigating such situations involves a systematic approach to understanding regulatory obligations, identifying potential risks within the model development lifecycle, and implementing controls to mitigate those risks. This includes seeking clarity on regulatory expectations, engaging with compliance and risk management teams, and ensuring that all development and validation activities are thoroughly documented and auditable. Professionals must prioritize adherence to the spirit and letter of regulations, not just the technical aspects of model building. Question 8. To address the challenge of ensuring regulatory compliance in financial model development using IBM Algo Financial Modeler, what is the most critical step a developer must take regarding data inputs? Option A. Utilize data from any available internal source without explicit verification if it appears relevant. Option B. Accept client-provided data at face value and proceed with model development to meet deadlines. Option C. Thoroughly document the origin, validation, and integration process for all data inputs, ensuring an auditable trail. Option D. Focus solely on the model's logic and assume data integrity is managed by other departments. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly document the origin, validation, and integration process for all data inputs, ensuring an auditable trail. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between delivering a functional financial model and adhering to stringent regulatory requirements for data integrity and model validation. Developers are often under pressure to meet deadlines, which can lead to shortcuts that compromise compliance. The challenge lies in balancing efficiency with the absolute necessity of regulatory adherence, particularly concerning the source and treatment of data used in financial models. Misinterpreting or overlooking regulatory nuances can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of client trust. The specific jurisdiction for this exam is not explicitly stated, but assuming a common regulatory environment for financial modeling, such as that found in the UK or EU, emphasizes the importance of robust data governance and audit trails. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the origin of all data inputs used in the IBM Algo Financial Modeler. This includes clearly identifying whether the data is sourced from approved internal systems, external reputable data providers, or directly from client input. For each data source, the developer must ensure that appropriate data validation checks are performed, and that the process for obtaining and integrating this data is auditable. This aligns with regulatory expectations for model transparency and data integrity, which are fundamental to ensuring the reliability and accuracy of financial models. Regulatory frameworks often mandate that models are built on sound data, and that the process of data acquisition and transformation is well documented to facilitate independent review and validation. This approach ensures that models' outputs are defensible and compliant with relevant financial regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that data provided directly by a client is inherently accurate and requires no further validation or documentation of its source. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Regulations typically require independent verification of critical data inputs, especially when those inputs directly influence financial outcomes. Relying solely on client-provided data without due diligence exposes the model to potential inaccuracies and misrepresentations, which can lead to flawed financial assessments and breaches of regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach is to use data from an unverified or unofficial internal source without explicit approval or a documented process for its inclusion. This bypasses established data governance protocols and introduces an unacceptable level of risk. Regulators expect financial institutions to have clear policies on data management, including the use of approved data repositories and the validation of data quality. Using unverified internal data undermines the auditability of the model and can lead to the use of erroneous information, violating principles of data integrity and sound financial practice. A third incorrect approach is to omit detailed documentation regarding the specific version or timestamp of the data used. This lack of precision makes it impossible to reconstruct the exact data set used for a particular model run, hindering any subsequent audit or validation process. Regulatory bodies require a clear audit trail, which includes the ability to trace model outputs back to the specific data inputs used at a given point in time. Failing to document data versions compromises this auditability and can be seen as a deliberate attempt to obscure the model's operational history, a serious ethical and regulatory concern. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a compliance-first mindset when developing financial models. This involves proactively understanding and integrating relevant regulatory requirements into the development lifecycle. When faced with data sourcing decisions, the professional reasoning process should prioritize 1. Identifying all applicable regulations and guidelines. 2. Assessing the risk associated with each potential data source. 3. Ensuring that all data acquisition and validation processes are thoroughly documented. 4. Seeking clarification or approval from compliance or risk management departments when in doubt. This systematic approach ensures that models are not only functional but also robust, reliable, and compliant, thereby safeguarding the organization and its stakeholders. Question 9. The control framework reveals that the development team for new IBM Algo financial modeler application has identified several potential risks. Which approach to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory expectations for robust financial modeling practices? Option A. Aiming to eliminate every single identified risk, irrespective of its potential impact or the cost of mitigation, to achieve a state of absolute risk avoidance. Option B. Documenting a detailed methodology that assesses the likelihood and potential impact of each identified risk, leading to a prioritized list of mitigation actions. Option C. Relying on the informal opinions of the lead developer regarding which risks are most concerning, without a structured assessment process. Option D. Focusing primarily on the technical sophistication and complexity of the model's algorithms, assuming that advanced techniques inherently reduce risk. The correct answer is B. Documenting a detailed methodology that assesses the likelihood and potential impact of each identified risk, leading to a prioritized list of mitigation actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent subjectivity in assessing the likelihood and impact of risks within a financial modeling context. Developers must balance the need for robust risk mitigation with the practicalities of development timelines and resource allocation. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial identification of risks to a nuanced understanding of their potential consequences and the effectiveness of proposed controls, all within the bounds of regulatory expectations for sound risk management practices in financial modeling. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it mandates a systematic and documented process for risk assessment, directly aligning with the principles of good governance and regulatory compliance expected within the financial services industry. Specifically, it emphasizes the need for a clear methodology that considers both the likelihood and impact of identified risks, leading to a prioritized approach for mitigation. This structured assessment ensures that resources are directed towards the most significant threats, thereby enhancing the integrity and reliability of the financial models developed. This aligns with the implicit regulatory expectation that financial models are developed and maintained with due diligence and a proactive approach to risk management, preventing potential financial losses or misstatements. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical complexity of the model, without a commensurate assessment of its business impact or the likelihood of failure, is professionally unacceptable. This oversight fails to address the core purpose of risk assessment, which is to protect the firm and its stakeholders from adverse outcomes. It represents a failure to consider the broader context of the model's use and potential vulnerabilities, potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny for inadequate risk management. Another incorrect approach, which relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a single senior developer without a formal process, is also professionally deficient. This method lacks objectivity and repeatability, making it difficult to demonstrate due diligence or to consistently apply risk management principles. It can lead to biases in risk identification and prioritization, potentially overlooking critical risks or overemphasizing minor ones. This ad hoc method is unlikely to satisfy regulatory expectations for a structured and auditable risk management framework. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the elimination of all identified risks, regardless of their perceived impact or the cost of mitigation, is professionally impractical and inefficient. While a thorough risk assessment aims to minimize threats, An absolute zero risk tolerance is often unattainable and can lead to excessive expenditure of resources on low-impact risks, diverting attention from more significant threats. This approach fails to demonstrate sound judgment and resource management, which are key professional responsibilities. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and purpose of the financial model. This involves identifying potential threats to the model's accuracy, reliability, and security. Subsequently, a systematic assessment of the likelihood and potential impact of each identified risk should be conducted, using a defined methodology. This assessment should inform the prioritization of risks, guiding the selection of appropriate mitigation strategies. The entire process, including the methodology, identified risks, assessments, and mitigation plans, should be clearly documented to ensure transparency, auditability, and continuous improvement. Question 10. Market research demonstrates that financial institutions are increasingly leveraging sophisticated modeling tools like IBM Algo Financial Modeler. When developing a new financial model, what is the most appropriate approach to risk assessment to ensure compliance with regulatory expectations for model integrity and reliability? Option A. Prioritize the rapid completion of the model, conducting only a cursory review of potential risks to meet project deadlines. Option B. Rely exclusively on the default risk assessment functionalities provided by IBM Algo Financial Modeler, assuming they meet all regulatory standards. Option C. Implement a comprehensive, documented process for identifying, assessing, and mitigating model-specific risks, ensuring alignment with regulatory requirements and best practices. Option D. Accept the risk assessments provided by external data vendors as a substitute for conducting an independent model risk assessment. Correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive, documented process for identifying, assessing, and mitigating model-specific risks, ensuring alignment with regulatory requirements and best practices. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the developer is tasked with implementing a risk assessment framework within IBM Algo Financial Modeler, a tool used for complex financial modeling. The challenge lies in ensuring that the chosen approach to risk assessment is not only technically sound and efficient within the tool, but also compliant with the regulatory expectations for financial institutions. The developer must balance the need for robust risk identification and mitigation with the practicalities of implementation and the specific requirements of the regulatory environment governing financial modeling. The pressure to deliver a functional model quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise the thoroughness of the risk assessment, making careful judgment and adherence to established principles paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks associated with the financial model. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory expectations for financial modeling. Specifically, it requires a comprehensive review of the model's design, data inputs, assumptions, and outputs to identify potential sources of error or misstatement. The assessment phase involves evaluating the likelihood and impact of identified risks. Mitigation strategies should be clearly defined and implemented, with ongoing monitoring and testing to ensure their effectiveness. This structured methodology ensures transparency, auditability, and accountability, which are critical for regulatory compliance and maintaining the integrity of financial reporting and decision-making. The emphasis on documentation is crucial for demonstrating adherence to regulatory requirements and for future audits or model reviews. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on the default risk assessment settings within IBM Algo Financial Modeler without further customization or validation. This fails to acknowledge that regulatory frameworks often mandate specific risk assessment procedures that may not be covered by generic software defaults. It represents a failure to exercise professional due diligence and a potential breach of regulatory requirements that demand a tailored and robust risk management process. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of model development over the thoroughness of the risk assessment, leading to a superficial review of potential risks. This approach is professionally unacceptable as it compromises the reliability and accuracy of the financial model, potentially leading to flawed business decisions and regulatory breaches. It demonstrates a disregard for the principles of sound risk management and the ethical obligation to produce reliable financial models. A further incorrect approach is to assume that the risk assessment performed by the data providers is sufficient, and therefore not to conduct an independent assessment of model-related risks. While data provider assessments are valuable, they do not absolve the model developer of the responsibility to assess risks inherent in the model's construction, logic, and application. This oversight can lead to significant unaddressed risks within the model itself, violating regulatory expectations for comprehensive risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to model development, integrating risk assessment throughout the entire model lifecycle, from design to deployment and ongoing maintenance. This involves understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to the financial institution and the model's intended use. A key decision-making framework involves establishing clear governance around model risk management, including defined roles and responsibilities, a robust documentation policy, and a process for independent validation. When faced with competing priorities, professionals must always defer to the requirements of regulatory compliance and ethical best practices, ensuring that the integrity and reliability of financial models are never compromised. The process should involve continuous learning and adaptation to evolving regulatory expectations and technological advancements. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that certain data processing steps within the risk assessment models can be significantly streamlined, potentially reducing computational time by 30%. However, the study does not explicitly detail how these streamlined processes might affect the underlying assumptions or the sensitivity of the risk outputs to various market factors. Which of the following represents the most prudent course of action for the IBM Algo financial modeler developer? Option A. Recommend discarding the efficiency study's findings for risk models, as any alteration to established processes carries an inherent risk of regulatory noncompliance. Option B. Immediately implement the streamlined data processing steps to realize the efficiency gains, assuming that the core risk calculation logic remains unchanged and therefore compliant. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive validation of the proposed streamlined processes, focusing on their impact on model assumptions, sensitivity analysis, and overall risk output integrity, in consultation with risk management and compliance teams, before any implementation. Option D. Proceed with implementing the streamlined processes, and then, at a later date, conduct a post-implementation review to assess any unintended consequences on risk outputs. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive validation of the proposed streamlined processes, focusing on their impact on model assumptions, sensitivity analysis, and overall risk output integrity, in consultation with risk management and compliance teams, before any implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the efficiency study's findings directly impact the firm's risk assessment processes, which are heavily regulated. The developer must balance the need for operational efficiency with the imperative to maintain robust risk management frameworks that comply with regulatory expectations. The challenge lies in interpreting the study's implications for risk modeling without compromising the integrity or effectiveness of those models. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based review of the efficiency study's impact on risk assessment. This involves validating the study's findings against regulatory requirements and internal risk policies. By engaging with risk management and compliance teams, the developer ensures that any proposed changes to financial models are not only efficient, but also compliant and effective in identifying and mitigating risks. This collaborative approach aligns with the principles of sound risk governance and regulatory adherence, ensuring that the firm's risk assessment capabilities remain robust and meet the standards set by the relevant regulatory bodies for financial institutions. An incorrect approach that suggests immediately implementing changes based solely on the efficiency study's recommendations, without further validation, fails to acknowledge the critical role of risk assessment in financial services. This would be a regulatory failure because it bypasses the necessary due diligence and oversight required to ensure that risk models accurately reflect the firm's risk profile and comply with regulatory mandates. It also represents an ethical failure by potentially exposing the firm to undue risk and failing to uphold professional standards of care. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring the efficiency study entirely due to concerns about potential regulatory noncompliance, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of proactive engagement with operational improvements and a failure to leverage potentially valuable insights. Ethically, it can lead to suboptimal resource allocation and a missed opportunity to enhance the firm's overall operational effectiveness, which indirectly impacts risk management by potentially straining resources. From a regulatory perspective, while not directly non-compliant, it can be seen as a failure to maintain a forward-looking and efficient operational framework, which regulators often expect. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the findings. Fully comprehend the implications of the efficiency study. 2. Assess regulatory impact. Determine how the findings align with or diverge from current regulatory requirements and expectations for risk assessment and financial modeling. 3. Consult stakeholders. Engage with risk management, compliance, and business units to gather diverse perspectives and ensure a holistic understanding. 4. Propose validated changes. Develop and test any proposed model modifications to ensure they maintain or enhance risk assessment accuracy and regulatory compliance. 5. Document decisions. Maintain clear records of the analysis, decisions made, and the rationale behind them. Question 12. Consider a scenario where a developer is tasked with configuring IBM Algo Financial Modeler to perform a critical risk assessment for a new financial product. The developer has access to historical data and a range of pre-built risk models within the software. The primary objective is to ensure the risk assessment is both accurate and compliant with relevant financial regulations. Which of the following approaches best reflects a robust and professionally sound methodology for this task? Option A. Utilize only the historical data provided, without further qualitative input or expert review, to train a custom risk model with an IBM Algo Financial Modeler, assuming that historical patterns will perfectly predict future risks. Option B. Thoroughly review the pre-built risk models. Adapt them to the specific characteristics of the new product, document all assumptions and limitations, and involve subject matter experts from relevant business units in the validation process. Option C. Focus solely on optimizing the model to produce the lowest possible risk scores, as this will likely satisfy regulatory scrutiny and present the product favorably. Option D. Immediately deploy the most complex pre-built risk model available in IBM Algo Financial Modeler, relying on its default settings to capture all potential risks, and assume it meets all regulatory requirements. The correct answer is B. Thoroughly review the pre-built risk models, adapt them to the specific characteristics of the new product, document all assumptions and limitations, and involve subject matter experts from relevant business units in the validation process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent subjectivity in risk assessment and the potential for bias to influence the outcome, even with sophisticated tools like IBM Algo Financial Modeler. The developer must balance the technical capabilities of the model with the qualitative judgment required to interpret its outputs in the context of evolving regulatory expectations and business objectives. The challenge lies in ensuring that the risk assessment is not merely a mechanical application of the tool, but a thoughtful process that considers the limitations of the model and the potential for unforeseen risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a holistic and iterative risk assessment process. It acknowledges that IBM Algo Financial Modeler is a tool to support, not replace, human judgment. By involving stakeholders from different departments, the developer ensures that the risk assessment benefits from diverse perspectives and expertise, leading to a more robust and comprehensive understanding of potential risks. This aligns with regulatory expectations that risk management frameworks should be integrated into business processes and subject to ongoing review and validation. The focus on documenting assumptions and limitations is crucial for transparency and auditability, which are key tenets of financial regulation. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the default settings of IBM Algo Financial Modeler without critical evaluation would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence and an over-reliance on automated processes, which can mask underlying assumptions that may not be appropriate for the specific context. This could lead to an inaccurate assessment of risk, potentially exposing the firm to regulatory breaches and financial losses. Ethically, it represents a failure to exercise professional skepticism and due care. Another incorrect approach, focusing exclusively on quantitative metrics generated by the model while neglecting qualitative factors and expert judgment, would also be flawed. Financial risk is multifaceted, and relying solely on numbers can overlook crucial qualitative aspects such as reputational risk, operational vulnerabilities, or emerging market trends that the model may not be designed to capture. This narrow focus can lead to a false sense of security and an incomplete risk profile, violating the principle of comprehensive risk management. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing speed of deployment over thorough validation and testing of the risk assessment model, would be a significant professional and regulatory failure. Rushing the process without adequate testing increases the likelihood of errors, misinterpretations, and the deployment of a model that does not accurately reflect the firm's risk landscape. This haste can lead to regulatory noncompliance and operational failures, demonstrating a disregard for the integrity and reliability of the risk management system. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the business context and objectives. 2. Identify all relevant stakeholders and their perspectives. 3. Select appropriate tools and methodologies, recognizing their limitations. 4. Develop a comprehensive risk identification and assessment framework that integrates quantitative and qualitative analysis. 5. Document all assumptions, methodologies, and limitations clearly. 6. Validate and test the risk assessment process rigorously. 7. Implement a continuous monitoring and review mechanism. 8. Ensure clear communication and reporting of risk assessments to relevant parties. Question 13. The investigation demonstrates that a developer is tasked with implementing a new risk assessment module within an IBM Algo financial modeler solution. The developer has extensive technical expertise with the platform, but has not been provided with specific guidance on the regulatory expectations for risk assessment in financial modeling within the UK financial services sector. The developer must decide on the approach to designing and implementing this module. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional practice and regulatory compliance in this scenario? Option A. Prioritize understanding and incorporating specific requirements outlined in the FCA's Senior Management Arrangements, Systems and Controls (SISC), sourcebook and relevant supervisory guidance on model risk management into the module's design and implementation. Option B. Focus solely on leveraging the advanced risk assessment functionalities available within IBM Algo Financial Modeler to create the most technically sophisticated module possible. Option C. Develop the module based on the developer's personal interpretation of risk assessment principles, without seeking external input or consulting regulatory documentation. Option D. Proceed with implementing a standard risk assessment methodology based on general industry best practices, assuming it will meet regulatory expectations. The correct answer is A. Prioritize understanding and incorporating specific requirements outlined in the FCA's Senior Management Arrangements, Systems and Controls (SISC), sourcebook, and relevant supervisory guidance on model risk management into the module's design and implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the developer is tasked with implementing a risk assessment framework within IBM Algo Financial Modeler without a clear understanding of the underlying regulatory expectations for such assessments in the context of financial modeling. The challenge lies in translating abstract regulatory principles into concrete, auditable model design and implementation choices. Careful judgment is required to ensure the model's risk assessment capabilities are not only technically sound, but also compliant with the spirit and letter of relevant regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes understanding the specific regulatory requirements that govern the use of financial models for risk assessment. This involves consulting relevant documentation, such as the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook, or other applicable UK regulatory guidance, to identify explicit or implicit expectations regarding model validation, data integrity, and the assessment of model risk. By grounding the implementation in these requirements, the developer ensures that the model's risk assessment features are designed to meet regulatory scrutiny, promoting transparency, accountability, and sound risk management practices. This proactive engagement with regulatory frameworks is essential for building trust and demonstrating compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical capabilities of IBM Algo Financial Modeler, without considering the regulatory context, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence regarding regulatory obligations. For instance, implementing a risk assessment feature without ensuring it can adequately capture and report on model limitations or assumptions, as might be expected by regulators, would represent a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the purpose of the model within the regulated entity's risk management framework. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a generic risk assessment methodology is sufficient without verifying its alignment with specific financial services regulations. This could lead to a model that fails to address the particular types of risks or the level of detail required by the relevant supervisory authorities. Such an oversight could result in regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and an inability to effectively manage the firm's risk profile. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the specific regulatory jurisdiction and relevant supervisory bodies. 2. Thoroughly review all applicable regulations, guidance, and supervisory expectations related to financial modeling and risk assessment within that jurisdiction. 3. Understand the business context and the intended use of the financial model. 4. Translate regulatory requirements into functional and technical specifications for the model. 5. Document all design choices and their rationale, explicitly linking them to regulatory compliance. 6. Engage in ongoing dialogue with compliance and risk management teams to ensure alignment. 7. Implement robust testing and validation procedures that specifically address regulatory concerns. Question 14. Upon reviewing the requirements for developing a new credit risk model in IBM Algo Financial Modeler, which approach to risk assessment best aligns with the principles of proactive model risk management and regulatory expectations for financial institutions operating under UK financial services regulations. Option A. Relying exclusively on the findings of the independent validation team to identify and rectify all model risks without any internal risk assessment during development. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment only after the model has been fully coded and is ready for independent validation. Option C. Prioritizing the optimization of the model's predictive accuracy metrics above all other considerations, including the underlying assumptions and data quality. Option D. Integrating risk assessment activities throughout the model development lifecycle, focusing on identifying and mitigating risks related to data, assumptions, methodology, and implementation as they arise. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment only after the model has been fully coded and is ready for independent validation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the developer is tasked with implementing a risk assessment framework within IBM Algo Financial Modeler. The challenge lies in ensuring that the chosen approach to risk assessment is not only technically sound and efficient for model development, but also compliant with the regulatory expectations for financial modeling, particularly concerning the identification and mitigation of model risk. The developer must balance the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of development timelines and the specific capabilities of the modeling software. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that effectively addresses potential model flaws without introducing undue complexity or inefficiency. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves integrating risk assessment directly into the model development lifecycle, focusing on identifying potential sources of model error and implementing controls within the model's design and validation processes. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory expectations, such as those outlined by the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA in the UK, which emphasize a proactive and embedded approach to model risk management. By focusing on the inherent risks within the model's logic, data inputs, and assumptions, and by building in validation checks and documentation from the outset, the developer ensures that risk is considered at every stage. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of significant issues arising during later stages of validation or deployment, thereby reducing the overall cost and effort of remediation. It also demonstrates a commitment to building sound and reliable financial models, a core tenet of responsible financial practice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to defer the comprehensive risk assessment until after the model has been fully developed and is ready for independent validation. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Regulators, such as those under the UK's Prudential Regulation Authority, PRA, and FCA, expect model risk to be managed throughout the entire model lifecycle, not just at the end. Post-development assessment often leads to costly and time-consuming rework, as fundamental design flaws or data issues may be discovered late in the process. This approach also increases the risk of deploying a flawed model, which could have serious financial and reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on external validation reports to identify and address model risks without any proactive internal assessment during development. While independent validation is crucial, it is a retrospective check. Failing to conduct internal risk assessments during development means that potential issues are not being identified and mitigated as they arise. This can lead to a situation where the model is fundamentally unsound, and the validation process becomes a mere formality of identifying already existing problems rather than a constructive process of risk mitigation. Ethically, this approach suggests a lack of ownership and responsibility for the quality and integrity of the model being built. A third incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the technical performance metrics of the model, e.g., accuracy of predictions, without considering the underlying assumptions, data quality, and conceptual soundness. While performance is important, a model can be technically accurate, but still carry significant model risk if its foundational elements are flawed or its assumptions are inappropriate for the intended use. This approach fails to address the root causes of potential model failure and can lead to a false sense of security. It also overlooks regulatory guidance that emphasizes the importance of understanding the model's limitations and the appropriateness of its design for its intended purpose. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to model development, embedding risk assessment activities throughout the entire model lifecycle. This involves 1. Early identification. Proactively identifying potential risks associated with data, assumptions, methodology, and implementation from the initial stages of model design. 2. Integration. Incorporating risk assessment and mitigation strategies directly into the development process, using tools and techniques available within IBM Algo Financial Modeler. 3. Documentation. Thoroughly documenting all risk assessments, identified risks, and implemented controls. 4. Validation. Ensuring that independent validation processes are robust and cover all identified risks. 5. Continuous monitoring. Establishing processes for ongoing monitoring and review of model performance and risk post-deployment. This systematic and integrated approach ensures compliance with regulatory expectations, promotes the development of robust and reliable financial models, and upholds professional standards of diligence and accountability. Question 15. Compliance review shows that the development team for a new IBM Algo Financial Modeler solution has primarily relied on the informal knowledge and experience of its senior members to identify potential risks, without a structured or documented risk assessment framework. Which of the following best describes the professional and regulatory implications of this approach? Option A. This approach is professionally sound because it is efficient and avoids the bureaucratic overhead of formal documentation, allowing for faster delivery of the financial model. Option B. This approach is acceptable as long as the team conducts a post-development review to identify any issues that may have arisen during the modeling process. Option C. This approach is acceptable as long as the senior developers have a proven track record of successful model development, as their experience inherently covers most potential risks. Option D. This approach poses significant regulatory and ethical risks due to the lack of a documented, systematic process, potentially leading to overlooked risks, bias, and an inability to demonstrate due diligence to regulators. Correct answer is C. This approach is acceptable as long as the senior developers have a proven track record of successful model development, as their experience inherently covers most potential risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent subjectivity in risk assessment and the potential for bias to influence the identification and prioritization of risks within a financial modeling context. Developers must balance the need for thoroughness with the practical constraints of project timelines and resources. The challenge lies in ensuring that the risk assessment process is robust, objective, and aligned with regulatory expectations, particularly concerning the accuracy and reliability of financial models. Failure to adequately identify and address risks can lead to model errors, misstatements, and ultimately, regulatory breaches. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks associated with the development of IBM Algo financial modeler solutions. This includes engaging relevant stakeholders, utilizing a structured risk assessment framework, and maintaining clear audit trails of decisions and actions taken. This approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of sound risk management and good governance, which are implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory frameworks governing financial services. By proactively identifying potential issues such as data integrity, model logic flaws, or implementation errors, developers can ensure the models are fit for purpose, reliable, and compliant with regulatory standards. This structured methodology also facilitates transparency and accountability, crucial elements for regulatory oversight. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on the experience of senior developers without a formal, documented risk assessment process. This is professionally unacceptable because it introduces a high risk of subjective bias and omits critical steps like stakeholder consultation and independent review. Regulatory bodies expect demonstrable processes, not just reliance on individual expertise, to ensure model integrity. This approach fails to provide an audit trail and can lead to overlooked risks that might be apparent to a broader group or through a structured checklist. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize risk assessment based on the perceived likelihood of a risk occurring without considering its potential impact on the model's outputs or regulatory compliance. A likelihood is a factor. Regulatory frameworks often emphasize the potential impact of a risk, especially in financial modeling where errors can have significant consequences. This approach is professionally flawed as it may lead to underestimation of risks that, while less likely, could have catastrophic outcomes if they materialize, thus failing to meet the duty of care expected in financial modeling. A third incorrect approach is to conduct risk assessments in isolation, without involving business users, compliance officers, or other relevant stakeholders. This is professionally unacceptable because it limits the scope of identified risks and fails to capture the full spectrum of potential issues. Financial models are used by various departments, and their perspectives are vital for a comprehensive risk assessment. Excluding these stakeholders can lead to the omission of critical operational or business-related risks that could impact the model's effectiveness and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals developing financial models should adopt a risk-based approach that is integrated into the entire development lifecycle. This involves establishing clear risk assessment policies and procedures, ensuring they are understood and followed by the development team. When faced with a scenario requiring risk assessment, professionals should first define the scope of the assessment, considering the model's purpose, complexity, and intended use. They should then employ a structured methodology, such as a risk register, to systematically identify potential risks across various categories, e.g., data, logic, implementation, operational. Crucially, the assessment should involve input from all relevant stakeholders to ensure a comprehensive view. The impact and likelihood of each identified risk should be evaluated, and appropriate mitigation strategies should be developed and documented. Finally, the effectiveness of these mitigation strategies should be monitored and reviewed periodically, with clear documentation of all steps taken and decisions made to provide an auditable trail. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that a new financial model is being developed with an IBM Algo financial modeler. The development team is considering how to integrate risk assessment into the model's lifecycle. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and best practices for risk assessment in financial modeling? Option A. Conducting a one-time, high-level risk assessment at the very beginning of the project and not revisiting it unless a major change is made to the model's core functionality. Option B. Relying on the experience of senior developers to subjectively identify and address any perceived risks as they arise during the coding process. Option C. Focusing solely on the technical accuracy of the model's calculations and assuming that any significant risks will be identified by the end user during testing. Option D. Implementing a structured risk assessment process that involves identifying potential model risks, e.g., data integrity, assumption validity, logic errors, assessing their impact and likelihood, and documenting mitigation strategies, with regular reviews throughout the development and deployment phases. The correct answer is D. Implementing a structured risk assessment process that involves identifying potential model risks, e.g., data integrity, assumption validity, logic errors, assessing their impact and likelihood, and documenting mitigation strategies, with regular reviews throughout the development and deployment phases. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because the developer is tasked with implementing a risk assessment framework within IBM Algo Financial Modeler, a tool used for financial modeling. The challenge lies in ensuring that the chosen approach to risk assessment aligns with the specific regulatory requirements of the exam's jurisdiction, which for C2020-002 IBM Algo Financial Modeler Developer Fundamentals is implicitly the UK regulatory framework and CISI guidelines, as these are common for financial modeling certifications. The developer must not only understand the technical capabilities of the tool, but also the underlying principles and regulatory expectations for risk assessment in financial services. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive and documented methodology for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks inherent in financial models. This aligns with regulatory expectations for robust risk management frameworks, such as those outlined by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, which mandate that firms have adequate systems and controls to manage risks. Specifically, a structured approach that considers both quantitative and qualitative factors and is integrated into the model development lifecycle ensures that risks are proactively managed rather than reactively addressed. This also adheres to CISI ethical guidelines, which emphasize professional competence and due diligence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical implementation without considering the broader risk context would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to models that are technically sound, but fail to adequately address regulatory compliance or business risk, potentially resulting in financial losses or reputational damage. Such an approach would likely violate FCA principles requiring firms to conduct their business with due skill, care, and diligence, and to have adequate risk management systems. Another incorrect approach that relies on ad hoc or subjective risk identification would also be a regulatory and ethical failure. This lacks the necessary objectivity and auditability required by regulators. It would fail to demonstrate a systematic process for risk management, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance and sound governance. A third incorrect approach that neglects the documentation and review of risk assessments would be a significant ethical and regulatory lapse. Regulators require clear evidence of risk management processes, including documentation of identified risks, their assessment, and the controls implemented. Without this, a firm cannot demonstrate compliance or effectively manage its risk exposure. A professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to the financial modeling context. This includes identifying specific regulations and guidelines that govern risk management and model governance. The developer should then translate these requirements into practical implementation strategies within the chosen financial modeling software. This involves a structured approach to risk assessment, ensuring that all potential risks are considered, documented, and appropriately managed. Furthermore, continuous review and adaptation of the risk assessment process are crucial to maintain compliance and effectiveness in the face of evolving risks and regulations. Question 17. Performance analysis shows that a newly developed IBM Algo financial modeler for credit risk assessment is exhibiting strong correlation with historical default rates. However, the validation team has raised concerns about the model's sensitivity to changes in key economic variables and the lack of clear documentation regarding the specific data sources used for certain input parameters. Which approach to performance evaluation best aligns with regulatory expectations for robust model development and validation in the UK financial services sector? Option A. Relying on the developer's assurance that the input parameters are appropriate without independent verification, as the model has performed well historically. Option B. Prioritizing the model's strong correlation with historical default rates as the primary indicator of success. Given its predictive power, Option C. Conducting a comprehensive validation that includes backtesting, stress testing, sensitivity analysis, and a qualitative review of conceptual soundness and documentation, ensuring alignment with regulatory guidance on model risk management. Option D. Focusing solely on the model's ability to generate outputs quickly and efficiently, as this is a key business requirement. The correct answer is B. Prioritizing the model's strong correlation with historical default rates as the primary indicator of success, given its predictive power. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, ensuring that the chosen approach for evaluating model performance aligns with both regulatory expectations and the specific business context. The challenge lies in selecting a method that is not only technically sound, but also demonstrably robust, transparent, and defensible to auditors and regulators. The pressure to deliver results quickly can sometimes lead to the adoption of shortcuts or less rigorous methods, which can have significant compliance implications. The need to balance efficiency with thoroughness requires careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted evaluation that combines quantitative metrics with qualitative review, specifically focusing on the model's ability to accurately reflect the intended financial outcomes and its adherence to the principles of sound model risk management, as outlined by relevant UK financial regulations, e.g., PRA SS 1/23, FCA FG 14/4. This includes backtesting against historical data, stress testing under various scenarios, and sensitivity analysis to understand the model's behavior. Crucially, it also involves a qualitative assessment of the model's conceptual soundness, the appropriateness of its assumptions, and the clarity of its documentation. This comprehensive approach ensures that the model is not only performing well on paper, but is also fit for purpose, well understood, and compliant with regulatory requirements for model validation and ongoing monitoring. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on a single, high-level performance metric without considering its limitations or the underlying model logic, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach lacks the depth required for robust model validation and can mask underlying issues that could lead to misstatements or poor decision-making. Fails to demonstrate due diligence in understanding the model's behavior across different conditions. Adopting a performance evaluation method that is not clearly documented or is based on subjective interpretations without objective validation is also professionally unacceptable. This lack of transparency makes it impossible to demonstrate compliance with regulatory expectations for model governance and auditability. It creates a risk of inconsistent application and can lead to a model being used in ways that were not intended or validated. Relying on performance metrics that are not relevant to the specific financial products or business processes the model is intended to represent is another critical failure. This indicates a misunderstanding of the model's purpose and can lead to a false sense of security regarding its performance. It demonstrates a lack of professional rigor in tailoring the validation process to the model's specific application, which is a key tenet of sound financial practice and regulatory guidance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured approach to performance evaluation, beginning with a clear understanding of the model's purpose, intended use, and the relevant regulatory landscape. This involves defining a set of appropriate quantitative and qualitative metrics that collectively provide a comprehensive view of the model's performance and robustness. The evaluation process should be documented thoroughly, including the rationale for metric selection, the methodology used, and the interpretation of results. Regular review and revalidation are essential, especially when there are changes to the underlying data, market conditions, or regulatory requirements. The ultimate goal is to ensure the model is reliable, accurate, and compliant, thereby safeguarding the firm and its stakeholders. Question 18. Strategic planning requires a developer to integrate a new data feed into an existing IBM Algo financial modeler solution. The business unit is pushing for immediate deployment to leverage the new data for upcoming market analysis, which approach best balances the need for rapid delivery with the imperative of maintaining model integrity and regulatory compliance. Option A. Deploy the new data feed with minimal testing, focusing only on whether the data appears to load without immediate errors and deferring detailed validation and documentation to a later, less pressured time. Option B. Implement the new data feed as a standalone module that is not fully integrated with the existing model, allowing for quick deployment but potentially leading to inconsistent analysis. Option C. Conduct a thorough impact analysis of the new data feed on existing model components, perform comprehensive unit and regression testing of the integrated functionality, and meticulously document all changes and testing procedures. Option D. Immediately integrate the new data feed directly into the core model logic to make it available for analysis as quickly as possible, assuming the data source is reliable. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough impact analysis of the new data feed on existing model components, perform comprehensive unit and regression testing of the integrated functionality, and meticulously document all changes and testing procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, balancing the need for rapid deployment of new features with the imperative to maintain model integrity and adhere to regulatory requirements. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise the robustness and auditability of the model, potentially exposing the firm to significant compliance risks and reputational damage. The developer must exercise sound professional judgment to navigate these competing demands, ensuring that speed does not come at the expense of quality and regulatory adherence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a structured and documented process for incorporating new functionality. This aligns with best practices in financial modeling and regulatory expectations for auditability and control. By performing thorough impact analysis, unit testing, and regression testing, the developer ensures that the new functionality integrates seamlessly without introducing unintended errors or vulnerabilities. Documenting these steps provides a clear audit trail, demonstrating due diligence and compliance with internal policies and external regulations. This methodical approach safeguards the model's reliability and the firm's adherence to regulatory standards, such as those governing the accuracy and integrity of financial data used for decision-making and reporting. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing new functionality without comprehensive impact analysis risks introducing subtle errors that could cascade through the model, leading to inaccurate outputs. This failure to proactively identify and mitigate potential issues is a direct contravention of the principle of maintaining model integrity, which is implicitly or explicitly required by financial regulations. Deploying changes without rigorous testing, including regression testing, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the potential consequences of introducing defects, which could lead to misstatements in financial reports or incorrect risk assessments. This lack of due diligence can result in breaches of regulations requiring accurate and reliable financial data. Bypassing the documentation of changes is a critical auditability failure. Regulators require clear records of model development and changes to ensure transparency and accountability. Without proper documentation, it becomes impossible to demonstrate compliance, investigate errors, or validate the model's behavior, leading to potential regulatory sanctions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to model development. This involves understanding the potential impact of any change on the model's outputs, its compliance with regulations, and its overall reliability. Before implementing any change, a thorough assessment of its scope and potential consequences should be conducted. This assessment should guide the development of a testing and validation strategy that is commensurate with the risk. Furthermore, maintaining meticulous documentation throughout the development lifecycle is paramount. This not only facilitates internal review and external audits, but also serves as a testament to the developer's commitment to professional standards and regulatory compliance. When faced with pressure to expedite delivery, professionals must advocate for the necessary time and resources to perform these essential steps, explaining the risks associated with shortcuts. Question 19. Analysis of the most appropriate strategy for incorporating new regulatory reporting requirements into an existing IBM Algo financial modeler solution, considering the need for accuracy, auditability, and adherence to regulatory frameworks. Option A. Make ad hoc modifications to the model as new information about the regulations becomes available, prioritizing rapid deployment over detailed documentation or formal validation. Option B. Consult with external subject matter experts for a quick overview of the new regulations, and then proceed with implementing the changes based on their general guidance, without formal internal validation. Option C. Implement the changes directly in the production environment, relying on informal testing by the development team to ensure compliance with the new regulations. Option D. Develop a comprehensive change request document outlining the proposed modifications. Conduct thorough impact analysis. Implement the changes in a development environment, perform rigorous testing, including regression and user acceptance testing, and obtain formal sign-off before deploying to production. The correct answer is C. Implement the changes directly in the production environment, relying on informal testing by the development team to ensure compliance with the new regulations. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, balancing the need for efficient model updates with the imperative of maintaining model integrity and compliance. The developer is tasked with incorporating new regulatory reporting requirements into an existing IBM Algo financial modeler (AFM) solution. The professional challenge lies in selecting an approach that is both technically sound and adheres to the strict regulatory framework governing financial modeling, particularly concerning data integrity, auditability, and the validation of changes. The chosen approach must ensure that the updated model accurately reflects the new regulations without introducing errors or compromising the audit trail. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented process for change management. This involves thorough impact analysis, rigorous testing, and comprehensive documentation, all of which are critical for regulatory compliance. In the context of financial modeling, especially within a regulated environment, maintaining an auditable history of changes and ensuring that all modifications are validated against requirements is paramount. This aligns with principles of good governance and risk management, ensuring that the model remains a reliable tool for regulatory reporting and decision-making. Each incorrect approach carries specific regulatory and ethical failures. An approach that bypasses formal change control processes, such as directly modifying production code without proper review and testing, risks introducing undetected errors and compromising the integrity of the model. This failure to follow established procedures can lead to inaccurate regulatory reporting, potentially resulting in fines, reputational damage, and regulatory sanctions. Furthermore, it undermines the auditability of the model, making it difficult to demonstrate compliance to regulators. An approach that relies solely on informal communication or assumptions about the new regulations, without seeking clarification or formal validation, is also professionally unacceptable. This can lead to misinterpretations of regulatory intent, resulting in a model that does not meet the required standards. Ethically, it is a failure to exercise due diligence and professional skepticism. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, such as implementing changes without adequate testing or validation, is a direct contravention of best practices for financial modeling in a regulated environment. This can lead to systemic errors that propagate through reporting, causing significant financial and regulatory consequences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to change management. This includes understanding the full scope of the change request, assessing its impact on existing functionality and data, developing a detailed implementation plan, conducting thorough unit and integration testing, obtaining formal sign-off on changes, and maintaining a comprehensive audit trail of all modifications. Adherence to internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines should be the guiding principle throughout the process. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a proactive approach to integrating new regulatory reporting requirements into existing financial models. A business unit has requested the rapid deployment of a new feature within IBM Algo financial modeler to capture and report on a newly defined risk metric. The development team is under pressure to deliver this functionality within a tight deadline, suggesting a streamlined approach that might involve deferring some formal validation steps until after initial deployment. Which of the following represents the most professionally sound and compliant approach to developing and deploying this new feature? Option A. Develop the new feature and conduct a quick peer review by senior developers, then deploy it, assuming that the collective experience of the team will catch any significant issues. Option B. Implement the new feature in phases, with each phase undergoing rigorous unit testing, integration testing, and user acceptance testing, followed by a formal validation and documentation review before full deployment. Option C. Deploy the new feature immediately to meet the business deadline, with a plan to conduct comprehensive testing and validation retrospectively as time permits. Option D. Integrate the new feature directly into the production environment, relying on the existing model's established controls and the assumption that the new logic is correct. The correct answer is B. Implement the new feature in phases, with each phase undergoing rigorous unit testing, integration testing, and user acceptance testing, followed by a formal validation and documentation review before full deployment. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in financial modeling development, balancing the need for rapid deployment of new features with the imperative to maintain model integrity and comply with regulatory expectations. The professional challenge lies in the inherent tension between business demands for speed and the rigorous, often time-consuming, processes required for robust model validation and governance. Developers must exercise careful judgment to ensure that shortcuts taken in the name of expediency do not compromise the accuracy, reliability, or auditability of the financial models, which are critical for regulatory reporting and decision-making. The correct approach, which involves a phased implementation with comprehensive testing and documentation at each stage, represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of sound financial management and regulatory compliance. This method ensures that each component of the new functionality is thoroughly vetted before integration, minimizing the risk of introducing errors or vulnerabilities. It also facilitates a clear audit trail, demonstrating due diligence and adherence to internal policies and external regulations. This systematic approach fosters transparency and accountability, crucial elements in the regulated financial services industry. An incorrect approach that bypasses formal validation for a critical component introduces significant regulatory and ethical failures. Specifically, it violates the principle of due diligence, which mandates that financial models used for regulatory purposes must be demonstrably accurate and reliable. This failure can lead to misstatements in regulatory filings, potentially resulting in substantial fines, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Furthermore, it breaches ethical obligations to act with integrity and competence, as it knowingly exposes the firm and its stakeholders to undue risk. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on peer review without formal testing, also falls short. While peer review is valuable, it is not a substitute for systematic, objective testing designed to uncover functional and performance issues. This oversight can lead to the deployment of flawed models, again triggering regulatory scrutiny and potential penalties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and adherence to established governance procedures. When faced with pressure to accelerate development, the first step is to clearly identify the potential risks associated with any proposed shortcuts. This should be followed by a thorough review of internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines to understand the non-negotiable requirements for model development and deployment. The decision-making process should involve consultation with relevant stakeholders, including compliance and risk management teams, to ensure a shared understanding of the risks and to collectively determine the most appropriate course of action. Ultimately, the decision must be grounded in a commitment to maintaining the highest standards of model integrity and regulatory compliance, even if it means pushing back on aggressive timelines.